Mood Gym with Don Browne. Shame, guilt. Are you under 35? Depressed, anxious? Today, we'll talk a little bit about the idea of shame and guilt, what might be the difference between the two, and are you feeling any shame or guilt? Are you feeling anxious, depressed? They might all be related in some definite ways. I think of shame as something where I have done something and I am thinking that I myself am a bad person, that there's some defect in my character. I have a bad character. Just generally, shame might be thought of as when you think that you are a bad person, there's something wrong with you. On the other hand, guilt is a little less onerous in that guilt, you recognize you have done something that probably is not correct, not probably balanced, not probably kind. You've done something to somebody or yourself that would be considered a wrong action or a wrong thinking, wrong movement. But contrasting with shame, shame would expand that into saying, well, not only did I do something wrong or do something not good or not kind, it's my character. I have bad character. I am just a bad person. I'm worthless. So try to consider the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt, you're just admitting you've done something that might not be correct. Shame is when you enlarge on that and blame yourself as being a bad person, an unworthy person. It's all your fault, and a very much more negative thought. So in our idea of paying attention to our behaviors and our thoughts every day and every moment, when you come across a feeling that you're feeling you did something wrong, then just consider that you're admitting to something and you might be guilty of it, but it isn't necessarily a shameful thing. That it's not something that you need to blame yourself as being an unworthy person or somebody less than normal, anything like that. So just try to keep that in mind when you come across these thoughts about you're bad, I'm worthless. That would be shame. Guilt is just saying, oh boy, I wasn't so kind when I said that to my friend. And that's just guilt. And you just leave it there. You just recognize it and carry on. And in that idea we've been talking about for many weeks now, this is episode 12, by the way. And thank everybody for listening. And feel free to make comments and ratings on the podcast you listen to, which are available on Apple Podcasts and Stitcher and just about anywhere that you get your podcasts. The Mood Gym podcast is available there. Anyway, going back to what I try to, little buzzword in my mind as I go through my daily life and get distracted by thoughts and by other things and other people. I just use two simple words named carefree curiosity. I try to have an attitude of carefree curiosity. I'm always interested in new things, observing people, but I'm not fixated on it. I'm not judging. I'm not making it writing a book about it. I'm just curious and carefree about it. So that might be couple words you might think about if that applies to you when you're going through your life and you have some anxious moment or depressed moments. Just try to have an attitude of having a carefree curiosity. You just look at something that's happening, observe it, and whatever happens, happens. So you're carefree. You're not going to dwell on it, not going to ruminate on it. You're just carefree and curious. So that might help you in your quest to overcome some anxiety and depression in your life. And then also, just a reminder, we've been talking many weeks on the subject of your emotions and feelings and how you just accept the emotions you have, accept the feelings you have. you don't dwell on them. So say you have a anxious moment with a boss or a friend, and normally our habit would be to dwell on that and think about, well, what did I do wrong? What did he do wrong? How can I solve this? And just go over and over it. And typically, the more you worry about something, the less it's going to help you. In fact, it's rare that you can think about something at length and come up with a solution, because your mind is all unsettled, you're unbalanced, your nerves are shot, you're just expending energy that you don't need to. So one thing I try to do, and you may find helpful, is whenever you have these emotions or these feelings of desperation or distress, anxiety, just accept that emotion in the moment. And the accepting of that emotion might only take about 10 seconds. You just say, oh boy, my stomach's churning. I'm nervous about what my boss said to me. I'm nervous about what I said unkind to a friend of mine. You just notice it. It takes 5 seconds, 10 seconds. And you say, oh, I had a feeling about that. My body's reacting in a certain way. And then you just recognize it, and that's it. That's all you have to do. You don't have to try to figure out a solution, and you don't have to figure out who's at blame. You just move ahead. Okay, another item that we talked about briefly, I believe, is when you're interacting with people, you will over time figure out and find that most people want to be heard, Heard. They want to tell you their story, tell you their distress, tell you their situation. And they actually just want to tell that story. They want to be listened to. So when you're in conversation with somebody and you're sensing they're distressed, there's something going on and they want to talk about it, your duty, in fact, is just to listen carefully to that story, to that person, and not judge. And contrary to what our habit would be, you don't want to give a solution. You don't want to give a solution, and you don't want to tell your story of a similar situation. Now, the only exception to that, and this would be rare that it's going to happen, the only exception when you would give your opinion or your thought or reflect back your story about a similar situation is if the other person specifically asks you to do that. They might say, I'd like your advice. Could you tell me what to do about this? Have you ever had this happen to you? And if they say something like that, then you're free to go ahead and tell your story. But if you're listening, if you just note how many times you talk to people, especially when they're in distress, that is very rarely going to happen. Unless you're like a professional, like you're a doctor or a psychologist, then certainly the client may very well ask you your opinion or what would you do in such a situation. But barring those situations where you are a professional being paid for your opinion, you will find that people do not want to hear your story or your solution. In fact, if you attempt to try to give your story or your solution, they're not going to listen to it because their mind is all wrapped up with what's going on with them, how they're distressed, how their boss is treating them, how they're having trouble with a friend or whatever. And they're not going to listen to what you say. And if they do, they're just going to dismiss it as saying, well, that doesn't apply to me. So the rule of thumb is when people are talking to you and they seem distressed or seem to be wanting to get out something that's on their chest, just listen very carefully. Don't try to tell them what to do. Don't give them your story. And your habits will lead you to do that. So you got to really be paying attention to what's going on in your mind too. So you just listen. And now you can what's called validate what people say. So somebody says, oh boy, I'm feeling so sad about what happened to me today. You can say, oh, you seem to be sad about that. You just validate what they're saying that in fact is probably true. Now, if they say, I'm thinking about robbing a bank and I know I can get away with it. Well, that's probably not true. So you don't want to say, oh, you're thinking about robbing a bank and you're going to get away with it, because that's not going to be true. So you don't want to you don't want to go along with something that's said that is not true. Now, what you could do is you can validate part of that thing. You could say, "Oh, I hear you want to rob a bank, and why do you think you can get away with it?" So you validate that he's thinking that, which he probably certainly is because he said it. But you don't want to validate the thing where he says he can get away with it. You kind of question about that. Say, "Oh, well, why do you think you can get away with it?" Now, of course, I'm giving you an extreme example, but in smaller examples, the idea is you validate or you reflect back what somebody says that would be true to them. You don't validate when something is, so outrageous or would get them in trouble. You don't want to validate that. You might question them about that. Why are they thinking that? Okay, so anyway, we'll go into that in some detail later on. But just want to give you that little tip about listening to people because they want to be listened to. They want to be heard, HEARD, and they generally never want to be told what to do or have you give them suggestions. All right, so that's our little tip on listening and not judging. And then vice versa. If you're feeling distressed or upset or something and you want to tell somebody, you might do that little exercise with them. Just say, Jim, could you listen to me? I have something I want to talk about, and I'd appreciate it if you just listen to me, and you don't need to give me any comments or any. I'm not looking for advice or anything. I just wanted to tell this to you. And then you tell them what's on your mind. And hopefully they can listen without judging and without trying to solve your problem unless you ask. And you will find it very refreshing when somebody is hearing you, that you are being HERD, heard. So that'd be an interesting thing for you to try with some close friends or partners and see how that works out for you. Okay, anyway, so just going today over a few little tips on how to alleviate some of your distress, anxiety, depression, checking out your emotions, having a little bit of carefree curiosity, and the idea of contrasting guilt, which we all have, versus shame, which we probably should not be blaming ourselves as unworthy or beneath normalcy, so to speak. We can be guilty, but we probably should not be feeling shameful in our actions and thinking. Okay, anyway, so this has been Mood Jim with Don Browne, and please listen to our other podcasts if you missed them. This is number 12, so you got 11 other ones plus an introduction that was done at the very beginning. And you can please subscribe to this podcast on your favorite place, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and just about everywhere you can find your podcasts. All right, thanks for listening. Talk to you next time.